Okay, so we'll start off with the Sutra class. And the previous class, we had covered the right motivations and intentions, the second factor of the Eightfold Path. And the sequence would be you've got view, and that actually shapes like what is your worldview, so to speak. Then your motivations actually plant the seeds of your karma, right? And then actually that is translated into karma by your actions. So today we'll talk about the result and the fruit of the right motivations and intentions, or the wrong motivations and intentions, and how that translates into actions for self and for others. Yeah, so I think that the most comprehensive sutta that actually covers like the actions by body, speech, and mind is this teaching called the Majjhima Nikaya 41 to the Brahmins of Salah. It's called the Salayekana Sutta, actually. And I'll just go through this because it's quite straightforward. So this is the Buddha speaking, and he says like householders, there are three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. There are four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. And there are three kinds of mental conduct not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. And how householders are there three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. Here, someone kills living beings. He is murderous, bloody-handed, given to blows and violence, merciless to living beings. He takes what's not given. He takes by way of theft the wealth and property of others in the village or forest. He misconducts himself in sensual pleasures. He has intercourse with women who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who have a husband who are protected by law, and even with those who are garlanded in the token of betrothal. That is how there are three kinds of bodily conduct not in accordance with Dharma, unrighteous conduct. And how householders are there four kinds of verbal conduct not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. Here, someone speaks falsehood. When summoned to a court or to a meeting or to his relative's presence or to his guild or to the royal family's presence and questioned as a witness does, so good man tells what you know. Not knowing, he says, I know, or knowing, he says, I do not know. Not seeing, he says, I see, or seeing, he says, I do not see. In full awareness, he speaks falsehoods for his own ends or for another's ends or for some trifling worldly end. He speaks maliciously. He repeats elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide those people from these, or he repeats to these people what he has heard from somewhere else in order to divide these people from those. And thus he divides those who are united, a creator of divisions, who enjoys discord, rejoices in discord and delights in discord, and a speaker of words that create discord. Which reminds me of a certain American politician that I will not say. Yeah, he speaks harshly, right? He utters such words as a rough, hard, hurtful to others, offensive to others, bordering on anger, unconducive to samadhi. He is a gossip. He speaks at the wrong time, speaks what is not fact, speaks what is useless, speaks contrary to the Dharma and the discipline. At the wrong time, he speaks such words as are worthless, unreasonable, immoderate, and unbeneficial. That is how there are four kinds of verbal conduct, not in accordance with the Dharma, unrighteous conduct. And how householders are there three kinds of mental conduct, not in accordance with the Dharma. I won't say the whole thing, right? So here someone is covetous. He covets, basically he wants, right? Like desires. He covets the wealth and property of others. Like, oh, may what belongs to another be mine. Or he has a mind of ill will and intentions like, oh, may these beings be slain and slaughtered. May they be cut off, perish, or be annihilated. Or he has wrong view, distorted vision that there's nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed, no fruit or result of good and bad action, no this world, no other world, no father, no mother, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, which I think is interesting that's put down as a wrong view, right? No good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have realized by direct knowledge and declared this world and the other world. That's how there are three kinds of conduct, mental conduct, not in accordance with Dharma, right? And also, if you don't do this, as the rest of the sutta goes here, that's actually what leads to the bad karma. It then proceeds actually, this sutta actually is quite long. It then proceeds actually to what you should do. And I think this way I'll actually make it clearer to see that what we should be focusing on, right? So how are there three kinds of bodily conduct in accordance with the Dharma, righteous conduct? Here, someone abandoning the killing of living beings abstains from killing living beings. With rod and weapon laid aside, gentle and kindly, he abides compassionate to all living beings. So this one I think is quite straightforward. I don't think, I wouldn't belabor the point. Basically, I think the key thing here is not just to avoid the killing, but actually that you are also intentionally gentle and kindly. I think that's actually quite important here. Secondly, abandoning the taking of what is not given. He abstains from taking what is not given. He does not take away by theft the wealth and property of others in the village or in the forest. Abandoning misconduct and sensual pleasures, he abstains from misconduct and sensual pleasures. He does not have intercourse with women who are protected by their mother and father, brother, sister, blah, 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 who have a husband, who are protected by law, with those who are garlanded in a token of betrothal. So that's actually how you basically no sexual misconduct, right? That's how, so these are the three kinds of bodily conduct in accordance with the Dharma. And how householders are there four kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dharma. Here, someone abandons false speech, right? Abstains from false speech. When someone to a court or to a meeting, or to somebody else and question like, so good man, tell us what you know. Not knowing, he says, I do not know. Or knowing, he says, I do know. I think it's quite interesting to say here that it's actually also that when you do know, you actually say that you know. It's not just like, oh, actually, I pretend I don't know, like you babodo, right? Yeah. And then not seeing, he says, I do not see. Seeing, he says, I do see. Right. So he does not in full awareness, right? I think this is actually an important point that this doesn't include things where you thought you were saying the right thing and then you said something wrong, right? This actually the whole point about like full awareness of the wrongdoing is actually quite important to create the bad karma. So it doesn't in full awareness like actually speak falsehoods for any like worldly end, right? So it's like sticking to the truth. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. Basically, you do not actually speak to divide people, right? He instead, right, if you see from the second passage here, thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that actually promote like unity and concord, right? Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words as are gentle, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, go to the heart, courteous, desired by many, and are agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip or idle chatter, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time, speaks what is fact, speaks on what is good, speaks on the Dharma and the discipline. So then he speaks on what is worth recording, like hopefully whatever we say during this recording is worth recording, right? Reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. That's how there are the four kinds of verbal conduct in accordance with the Dharma, righteous conduct. And how are there the three kinds of mental conduct? So this one I covered before, I won't cover too much, but basically that you're not covetousness, you don't desire, you don't have ill will, and you have that right view, which we covered in the session on the right view and cause and effect, right? And I think that the interesting thing to note on this sutta, right, and frequently I actually see this in all the suttas where the Buddha actually talks about, he always frequently starts off with like, what do you not do? What do you stop doing first? Before he talks about actually what you should do, right? And I think that, we talk about that sutta of the lump of salt in the previous lecture, right? We talked about actually the way to get rid of like bad karma is to dilute away with like good things. So why is it that when the Buddha's teaching, he doesn't focus on like, oh, we just focus on the good things, doing the good things, but we don't talk about like, he doesn't talk about just that. He talks about actually you need to first stop doing the bad stuff, then you actually do the good stuff, right? And I think what follows from here onwards is my personal interpretation. I think that if you think about the way that samsara works, right? I think the next sutta excerpt is a very interesting one to elaborate on this, right? Where the Buddha is talking about how, as each of us, right, as with our sense of self, as we're going through this realm of like samsara, this repeated rebirth, right? Just the tears that we have shed from crying, from the death of our parents, our family, loved ones, loss of wealth, loss through illness, and being united with like what we don't like and separated from what we like. The tears that we have and that we shed, right, are more than all the water in the four oceans. And I think that this gives you a sense of the sheer scale of samsara, right? That is just so big and boundless, right? And so what this means, right? If you think about the usual typical person going through life, sometimes you do some good things, sometimes you do a lot of like bad things, and it's like a bit of like an even mix between like the two, right? And you multiply this across like hundreds of lives, hundreds of thousands of like lifetimes. What you then have, right, is actually like an infinite power of like good karma and an infinite power of like bad karma in that sense, right? And the thing to note about samsara though is that the nature of samsara is to actually throw at you things from the five sense world, right? It is actually everything from the five sense world, right? It's a hook for you, right, to actually stay in samsara, right? So when you are in this hook, right? And if you read about dependent origination, it's a sequence of events, right? With this whole craving, right? With this feeling that's fed by contact with the five sense world, this it becomes this never-ending cycle, right? That just keeps you bound to it, right? And so if you don't break off actually like doing all the wrong things, right? If you don't break off actually the contact, you don't break off actually the negative things that are done by due to like desire or actually like ill will, you end up actually like creating, right, both actually as you're diluting your, if you don't do the stopping the bad things, as you're diluting away your salt pile is also growing at the same time. So you end up actually having this like infinite salt pile and infinite water, right? It's just like going non-stop. Sometimes like the water is more, sometimes the salt is more, and just keeps going on like this. And what ends up as a end result, you stay in samsara, right? So that's actually why I think that the Buddha actually repeatedly throughout the whole suttas, right, all the suttas, he always talks about you stop doing the bad things, right? And it's very, very important for us to actually like stop doing the bad things. And that's why actually as Buddhists, one of the first things you do is to take 5 precepts, right? Is to stop doing the bad things. And that in itself is actually a gift, right? And then after you've stopped doing the bad things, right, what you've effectively done is that you've stopped adding to the salt. And then actually, as you're doing more good things, right, as you're getting the joy, the inspiration, from doing like acts of kindness, gentleness, compassion, you're then actually increasing the water and to dilute the negative. So that's actually like the sequence of how the Dharma should be practiced with our actions by body, speech, and mind. So I think that the to add on to this particular sutta, not to this sutta, sorry, the Majjhima Nikaya 41, with regard to the mind, right, I think that we have spoken about like the 19th sutta, the two kinds of thought, right? How you actually apply the wisdom power to ask yourself, okay, the thoughts that arise in my mind, like which bucket is it? Is it like dealing with sensual pleasure, like the wrong intentions and motivations, or are they like letting go, making peace, being kind, being gentle, right? And I think the truth of the matter, though, is that whenever we sit down and we meditate, or even our daily lives, all of us, right, as long as you are not fully enlightened, or as long as you are actually not an anagami, right, a non-returner, you will actually have to deal with thoughts and motivations and emotions of some degree of like sense desire and ill will, are the two of the biggest of the five defilements. And when you're sitting down to meditate and going on a retreat, right, and that happens, right, then how do you get rid of that, right? Technically, how do you deal with it? How do you, okay, like you hear the parable, the simile of the salt and the water, say, okay, sure, but then how do I like deal with the salt when it's like, just when I'm about to meditate, that salt is like thrown on my face, right? So the next sutta that I'm going to share with you is a neighboring sutta to the two kinds of thought, which is Majjhima Nikaya 19. This is Majjhima Nikaya 20, which also has a parallel, right, to the Chinese. And so this is where the Buddha actually talks about when you're trying to meditate, right, like pursuing the higher mind, right, you should actually give attention to these 5 signs, right? And when you are focusing on like some meditation object and sign, then actually as you're meditating, like you have all these like unwholesome bad thoughts that arise, right? Connected with like desire, with hate and delusion. When that happens, then you should give attention to some other sign that's connected with something that's wholesome, meaning that whatever that actually helps you cultivate, like non-desire, like metta instead of like hate, and actually like it gives you some clarity as well, right? And I think that the in my mind, actually the next paragraph here, the similes are a very powerful one, right? Just as a skilled carpenter or his apprentice might knock out, remove, or extract a coarse pack by means of a fine one, meaning like a small, like like a very large piece of wood, right? You use a small piece of wood to actually knock it out, right? So too, when a bhikkhu gives attention to some other thing, right, something in his mind that's like connected with like what's wholesome, that actually like knocks out actually the unwholesome thought, right? So that's actually the first one. The Chinese simile, right, which I put here in the Chinese in the bottom. Apologies for those who can't read Chinese. To translate into English is actually broadly similar. It also talks about a carpenter or a carpenter's apprentice, but instead of actually talking about a pack, the simile here is that the carpenter would use inked string, use it onto the wood, and actually use a sharp axe, right, to actually like make it straight, make the piece of wood straight. Yeah. So both cases, like whether is it actually like using a wholesome thought to like knock out the unwholesome one, or actually using a wholesome thought to actually set straight, right, your mind, right? It's both similes are actually quite powerful, and I think actually is like worthwhile to share. The second part of the sutta, then the Buddha talks about give. Okay, so if you try to pay attention to the what is like wholesome, right, but then you still have all these unwholesome thoughts that arise, then you should actually move on to the next one where you examine the danger in those thoughts, right? So these are actually cause like suffering and like so on and so forth. This is very similar to the previous class where we covered Majjhima Nikaya 19, right? The 2 kinds of thought, where you also talk about actually the danger. The Buddha also spoke about actually I understood the danger of these thoughts, right? But I think that the simile here is really very powerful, right? Where just as a woman or a man, young, youthful, fond of ornaments, would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted if the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human being was hung around his or her neck. So too, when a bhikkhu examines the danger in those thoughts, his mind becomes steady, internally quieted, brought to singleness and actually samadhi. And I think that the in this one actually the Chinese is exactly the same, right? There's no difference between the Chinese and the Pali. And I think that actually what is useful to highlight here, right, especially if I use the example of like anger, right? I don't know if you follow, if any of you use Twitter. Instagram actually like tends to be like slightly better, but on Twitter, right, there are all these like people who are extremely filled with like righteous anger, right? Like, oh, this is so terrible. Like, why is this happening? This should be totally changed and so on and so forth. And frequently the motivations are actually like very noble, to be quite frank. Like they tend to be like motivations of like they see like inequality, something that's unfair. But what happens, right, is actually the if you think about the thoughts of anger, when you're in the if you just recollect about yourself, like when you're in the middle of the anger, right, what happens is that you tend to actually get some gratification from it. There is a sense of I'm doing the right thing, you know. And I think what is also interesting is that if you try this next time that somebody is that you're working with or like somebody that you love gets angry, you just point out to them and just say, "Oh, you seem quite angry." The most frequent reactions are, "No, I'm not angry at all," right? And there's this like, "Oh, I'm not angry. I'm just doing like what is right." That kind of like thinking, right? And what they don't realize is that while they might believe that they are doing the right thing, what is happening is actually that their mind is actually being completely defiled by actually this defilement of anger and ill will. Yeah. And that defilement, right, is like really, as you meditate further and you actually get experience with some of the deeper states, is really a huge waste. It's like you're like, wow, it's like it's as though that somebody has been given like a beautiful shining, like 10-carat diamond, and then somebody goes, okay, the right thing to do with this, right, is to dump it into like this pile of shit, and then you take that piece of shit and you just go around saying, oh, this is fantastic, all right, this is the right thing to do. Yeah, it's a complete delusion, actually. So I think that this recognition of your mind is actually a very pure thing, it's a very wonderful thing. Don't get default by this. Yeah. If I were to share a personal story, when I went on pilgrimage in 2012, one of the things that really infuriated me, right, was to see all these fake monks and fake nuns in the reason why I know that they're fake, right, is because that they go around, dressed in like monks or nuns robes, begging for money, and they happily collect, like literally they're just like gleefully collecting all the Indian rupees, right, in their begging bowl. And I remember being absolutely like upset about this. I was just like, my God, like this is actually like the Buddha's like it's a place of like pilgrimage, right? Why is it being default in this way? When this lady who is now a bhikkhuni, she actually pulled me aside and she said, I see you're very angry, but don't be. That person's karma is that person's karma, right? Your karma now is that you're actually being angry, you're defiling your mind in a place where actually is actually very powerful. Don't waste this time. And that's when it actually shook me out. But I was just like, oh, okay. And then I realized actually that I was doing exactly this thing. I was taking that carcass of the snake and a dog and putting it on my own neck. Yeah. So I think that this is actually a very powerful when we actually recognize like these things like anger, for example, that it truly is a defilement, right? Then we actually would be able to find a better balance for ourselves. Yeah. So moving on. So if you examine the danger, right, and you still have all these like unwholesome thoughts connected with like desire, hate, and delusion, right? Then what you should do is to basically like forget those thoughts and not give attention to them, right? And then the simile is like just as a man with good eyes who did not want to see forms, they would just either shut their eyes or look away. So same thing, you actually just like look away, right? And then in the interest of time, I kind of like speed on. Then if you're still trying to forget those thoughts or look away, you still have all those thoughts, right? Then actually what you should do is to still the thought formation. So just as a man walking fast might consider, why am I walking fast? What if I walk slowly? And then he would walk slowly. Then like, why am I walking slowly? What if I stand instead? Then he stands. Why am I standing? What if I sit? Then he sits. Why am I sitting? What if I lie down? And he'll lie down. And by doing so, substituting for each grosser, meaning like more coarse or like larger posture for one that was more subtle, right? And so too, right, the bhikkhu actually like would gradually over time, right, become actually like more still and like actually samadhi. I would actually say that my personal piece of advice is, say for example that there's something extremely upsetting for you, like say for example, something happened to a loved one, you're in the hospital, for example. uh, the big mistake that a lot of people do is to say, okay, I need to go and meditate now, right? And frequently what is happening is that you are actually dealing with like a lot of like things at a point in time, dealing with like loved ones, like emergencies, making key decisions, and so on and so forth, right? It's a lot of action and a lot of like agitation. You don't want to go from like walking fast to actually just lying down straight away, right? So I think that the better way, right, is to actually go, okay, I am upset, to kind of like check how are you feeling at that point in time, to do things that are actually slightly calmer. So for example, doing things like walking meditation instead of like breath meditation, or to do chanting instead of like just being completely still, for example. Then gradually, as you do this, right, you can actually feel yourself like becoming more calm, and then you actually become more steady. Yeah, so that's my advice for such things. Don't start by watching the breath, right? Then the last part of this sutta, right, is I call it the emergency brake. Venerable and Ayo calls the same thing. It's like when even if you try to still the thought formation, you stop all these things and you really want to act on like your desire, your hate, and your delusion, right? Then you just use complete willpower to actually stop it, right? And I think that the important point to highlight here in the same sutta, I don't know if I have that part right, in the same sutta, right, actually, the Buddha actually talks about how you should actually follow this exact sequence, right? Of starting first with focusing on like what is wholesome instead of like what is unwholesome. And then when this doesn't work, then you move on to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. But instead, you notice that a lot of people, right, they will actually just dive straight into like, oh, my mind's like thinking like crazy thoughts. I need to use like willpower. Let me stop doing that. And then they use, oh, I need to like force myself to not doing this. And what happens, right, when you do this is that you're basically repressing yourself, right? And in the same way that a car, right, yes, a car can avoid, how to put it, a car can avoid crashing or being derailed from its journey by an emergency brake. But no car ever progresses on the journey, right, with an emergency brake, right? You can never like, there's no journey that like is completed just by using the emergency brake repeatedly, right? But emergency brake can actually help you like to prevent you from like crashing and so on and so forth. So this is actually really the last resort. It shouldn't be your first resort, right? Instead, your very first resort should be the very first thing, right? Of like, okay, you got the unwholesome thoughts and the connected with desire, hate, and delusion. Focus on something else that's actually wholesome. And this is actually a very underutilized way in the workplace. Yeah. So if I were to give like the two defilements, right, as examples in the workplace, how this is actually very useful. We talk about sense desire, right? Suppose, right, for example, that you are a manager, right, and then you got this new subordinate that just joins your team, right? Very attractive of the gender that you're attracted to, whichever gender you're attracted to, right? And say, for example, that this particular person, right, is really your type, right? Like you have that affinity for this kind of like, person's looks or whatever it is. You need to be very careful you need to be very careful and to not pretend to yourself, right, that you are in full control, right? Because you already have that affinity already. You have that inclination to like look at actually like what is attractive in that person to you, right? And so, right, what I've seen in a lot of friends or colleagues and all that stuff, right, is that they'll be like, no lah, no lah, it's just work, it's just drinks, it's fine. And then very quickly things escalate. And then before you know it, right, like, oh, they've like committed something they didn't want to do, they've done something that they completely regret, right? Simply because of this lack of awareness. And also, I think without realizing actually that they actually have that unwholesome desire that has arisen, right? And this particular sutta presents to you a very useful way, right, to help you balance out. Basically, right, okay, if you start to have that unwholesome desire, then look for something, right, that is connected with the wholesome, that helps you to balance it out. And that we're going to talk a little bit more about that, right? And I think that in this case, right, you look for the opposites, right? So if like there's desire, then you pay attention to like actually what is unattractive about this person, right? Ajahn Brahm has frequently spoken about how he would deliberately look for pimples on the attractive person's like face, because he's like, you can always find a pimple, which is true, right? You can always find a pimple or something like that. But I think that the other thing I also tend to do is I would deliberately like stop and look away from like what I find attractive of that person, and then I'll deliberately focus on actually like the unattractive parts. So if I ever am talking to you and then I'm like staring at one part of you, then you might know what I'm doing. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Yeah. So that same technique, right, of like directing your attention to something else that's connected to something that's wholesome applies for the second defilement of like ill will. We think about the people that we're irritated with, right? Like whether is it like a boss, colleague, subordinate, very very annoyed by, right? And the ill will arises, right, like as related to our earlier classes, it's because you're perceiving actually the things that irritate you and you actually are averse to. Oh my God, that person's breath is like so bad. My gosh, why is that person like like talking in this way that's so annoying, right? And so on and so forth. And so your mind is already inclining in the direction of like finding fault, trying to like actually pick like what's wrong. And the way to solve this is to actually pay attention to what's wholesome. It's like instead of like looking for the things that cause you ill will, look for the things that you actually appreciate. look for the things that actually that you're like, okay, actually this person is actually just a human being like me. That person is a human being also. Right. All those other perceptions, right, that allow you to balance it out. Yeah. And then actually that helps you to actually like over time, right, as you do this repeatedly. So you can't just do this once and expect that, oh, hey, PJ, this doesn't work. Doesn't work that way, right? You have to do this repeatedly. Is that deliberately direct your attention to actually what helps you to actually have that wholesome state of mind. Yeah, the elaboration of this technique, right, is actually found in another sutta, and this is spoken by Sariputta, right, who I think he's really like quite amazing, right? How do you get rid of resentment for someone whose behavior by body is impure, but behavior by way of speech is pure? And the analogy of like actually, like if you're a rag robes wearer, so these are monks that wear robes, right, that are actually literally patched together with different pieces of rags. So like the Chinese monks, like all the squares, it's supposed to represent the different rags, no? Right? Yeah. So then what they will do, right, is to spread out actually like if there's a rag by the side of the road, they spread it out. Then they actually tear out what's intact and take it away with them. So then in the same way, you ignore the impure behavior and you focus on the pure behavior. All right. The rest of the sutta is the same thing, right? But I think that the similes are quite powerful. The second one of like, suppose there's a lotus pond, right? Then you will plunge into the lotus pond, you sweep away the moss and the aquatic plants and drink with your cupped hands and be on your way. And in the same way, you ignore the person's impure behavior and you focus on the pure behavior. Then this one is like, okay, this person, the behavior by body and speech is impure, but then their mind, right, from time to time actually has got, openness and clarity. Then it's like a cow's like hoof print. There's like very little water. It's very, very little water. But then what you do is that you actually bend down, right? So you're deliberately making the effort to go down, right, to actually like focus on the good things, right? And you go down on all fours and drink it up like a cow, then you move on your way. Same in the same way, then you ignore their impure behavior and you just focus on like what is actually good, their goodness of their mind from like time to time. Then for somebody who, they are body, speech, and mind all teruk, all cannot make it earn, right? And the way to approach such a person, right, is to actually approach them in the same way that suppose that you're somebody traveling and they are like sick, suffering, and gravely ill. Then another person seeing them would be like full of like kindness, compassion, and sympathy. It's like, oh, I hope that somebody will help them because if they don't get help, they'll actually die right here and there, right? So in this way, right, you ignore that person's impure behavior and actually you focus and you think of them with nothing but compassion, right? But then if you have somebody who is by body, speech, and mind, and from their mind, they have this openness and clarity of heart from time to time, right? So body, speech, and mind relatively good. Then you should plunge into the lotus pond to bathe and drink, and then after that you emerge and lie down and just like the park and the shade of the trees, right? And in the same way, you should focus on their pure behavior and on the fact that they get this openness, and that's how you get rid of the resentment, right? Relying on a person who is impressive all around, the mind becomes confident. Right. So you actually focus on the fact that this person, yes, they might have done something wrong to me like once in a while, but actually this person is a really, really good person. And then you just rely on that person. And that's how your mind actually becomes confident. So basically the TLDR of like what Venerable Sariputta was saying is that you just ignore the bad qualities, you focus on the good qualities instead. Right. And the detailed things, right, of like what the Buddha gave advice on like what you should focus on as like a antidote to balance out the unwholesome things, right, is actually in this sutta, the longer advice to his son Rahula, right? To balance like ill will, you focus on like metta, right, loving kindness. To balance vihimsa, right? The cruelty or ruthlessness, you focus on compassion, right? To balance out like this discontentment or like the envy, right? You focus on like mudita, like rejoicing, sympathetic joy. Then if you have got this repulsion, right, this like disgust, right, then you focus instead of like upeka, like equanimity, right? And then for last, like I mentioned, you focus on like actually the ugliness, the asubha stuff. Yeah. So those are actually like the way to like help to balance out things now. And I think that the to do all this, right, actually does require some degree of mindfulness. And actually the degree of mindfulness, right, uh, mindfulness doesn't start with the seventh factor of the Eightfold Path, contrary to popular perception. But it actually starts already in the sixth factor, right? When in Sama Vayama, when you are actually trying to do the right thing, right, for your own mind, you are already actually like you actually already require like some degree of like base degree of like understanding actually what's your mental state at that point in time in order to actually like do like right striving or endeavor, right? The translation of striving for Sama Vayama in this case, I think maybe it connotes a little bit too much of the effort. Actually, the effort here is not really the same as using willpower, but it's actually really about like understanding and wisdom. So what are the four kinds of striving, right? The Sama Vayama. You generate the desire for the non-arising of like unarisen, unwholesome states. So like things like desire, ill will hasn't arrived. Then you actually ensure you generate actually that you try to make sure that it doesn't happen, right? Then if you have got those arisen like unwholesome states of like desire, ill will, and delusion, then you actually abandon them. You let them go. You let them actually like disappear. Then you focus on the wholesome states, the exact opposite, right? That of like renunciation, nekama, that of like a metta, that of actually of the kindness and gentleness, right? Then you actually try to actively, if they haven't arisen, then you actively cultivate the arising of them. And if for those that have already arisen, right, you ensure actually that they persist. You continue to actually develop this. You continue to actually ensure that it doesn't decline, that actually grows with like development. So that's actually the four kinds of like endeavor. Yeah. So this is where you actually already have that basic mindfulness, right? And this is actually linked to your actions by body, speech, and mind. Yeah. So I think that this actually um this entire section will be like the actions on body, speech, and mind, focus entirely on yourself so far, right? Moving on, right, we'll talk actually about the second part of like this class today, right? We'll talk about actually like what are the actions by body, speech, and mind that are focused on other people, right? And I think that the next one will be a bit long, but it's one of my favorite suttas, so I ask for your indulgence in a little bit. So this is the Upakalesa Sutta. It's the only sutta where the term nimitta is used repeatedly, right? It talks about like lights in the mind and so on and so forth. So I've heard at one time, the Buddha was staying near Kosambi in Gosita's monastery. Now, at the time, the mendicants of Kosambi were arguing, quarreling, and disputing, continually wounding each other with like barbed words. And then the monk went up to the Buddha and bowed, stood to one side and asked him, like, please go to these monks out of compassion. And the Buddha consented in silence. So the Buddha went up to these monks and said, enough, stop arguing, quarreling, and disputing. Then as he said this for one, two, three times, you know, the for each time that he said this, right, there was a monk that said to him, like, wait, sir, let the Buddha, the Lord of the Dharma, remain passive, dwelling in blissful meditation in the present life. We will be known for this arguing, quarreling, and disputing. It's basically saying that it's not your tai chi. You just go and like sit and meditate, right? Which is quite disrespectful. This is your teacher, right? And so then in the Buddha roped up in the morning and took his bowl and rope and entered Kosambi for alms. And after that, he set his lodgings in order, and then he recited these verses while standing there. When many voices shout out at once, no one thinks they are a fool. While the Sangha is being split, none thought another to be better. Those pretend to be astute, they talk their words right out of bounds. They blab at will, their mouths agape, and no one knows what leads them on. They abuse me, they hit me, they beat me, they rob me. For those who bear such a grudge, hatred never ends. They abuse me, they hit me, they beat me, they rob me. For those who bear no such grudge, hatred has an end. For never is hatred settled by hate, it is only settled by love. This is an ancient law. Others don't understand that here we need to be restrained. But those who do understand this, being clever, they settle their conflicts. Breakers of bones and takers of lives, thieves of cattle, horses, and wealth, those who plunder the nation, even those can come together. So why on earth can't you? If you find an alert companion, a wise and virtuous friend, then overcoming all adversities, wander with them joyful and mindful. If you don't find such a companion, no wise and virtuous friend, then like a king who flees his conquered realm, wander alone like a tusker in the wilds. It is better to wander alone. There's no fellowship with fools. Wander alone and do not do wrong, at ease like a tusker in the wilds. And after speaking these verses while standing, the Buddha went to the village of the child salt miners, where Venerable Bagu was staying. And after he, inspired Venerable Bagu, he got up from his seat and set out for the eastern bamboo grove. Now, at the time, the Venerables Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbala were staying in the eastern bamboo park. The park keeper saw the Buddha coming from the distance and said to the Buddha, "Don't come into this park. There are these three gentlemen who are cultivating, they love themselves, staying here, don't disturb them." The Venerable Anuruddha heard the park keeper and said to him, "Don't keep the Buddha out, good park keeper. So our teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." And he then went to Nandiya and Kimbala and said to them, "Come forth, Venerables, come forth. Our teacher, the Blessed One, has arrived." Then Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbala came out to greet the Buddha. One received his bowl and robe, one spread out a seat, one set out water for washing his feet. And then the Buddha settled down. And he asked, "I hope you're keeping well, Anuruddha. I hope you are well, and I hope you are not having trouble getting alms food." "We're keeping well, sir. We're all right. We have no trouble getting alms food." "I hope you're living in harmony, appreciating each other without quarreling, blending like milk and water, and regarding each other with kindly eyes." "Indeed, sir, we live in harmony, as you say, but how do you live in this way?" "In this case, sir, I think I'm fortunate, so very fortunate, to live together with spiritual companions such as these. I consistently treat these venerables with kindness by way of body, speech, and mind, both in public and in private. I think, why don't I set aside my own ideas and just go along with these venerables' ideas?" And that's what I do. So though we are different in body, we are one in mind, it seems to me. And then similarly, Venerable Nandiya and Kimbala said the same thing. And then the Buddha asked, "Okay, good, but I hope you're living diligently, keen, and resolute. And then how do you live this way?" And then they say that in this case, whoever returns first from alms round, prepares the seats, puts out the drinking water in the rubbish bin, basically do whatever that needs to be done, right? Whether it's like any duties and so on and so forth, right? But we don't break into speech, right? If say, for example, that they need somebody else, they'll summon the other with a wave of hand, they'll set it up by lifting together with their hands. But we don't break into speech for that reason. And every 5 days, we sit together for the whole night and discuss the teachings. And that's how we live diligently, keen, and resolute. So in other words, right, instead of like the first bunch of monks, Anuruddha, Nandiya, and Kimbala first focus on their appreciation for each other. Right? It's like this sense of gratitude. It's like, I really respect you, right? And it's not just like actually like, "Oh, I really respect you." Actually, well, this person's actually an idiot, right? You don't think that way, right? But actually, both in public and in private, you're actually like treating these with like kindness by body, speech, and mind, and that appreciation, that gratitude, and you actually let go of your sense of self, right? And then when they do interact with each other, right, it's not about like, "Hey, today's your turn to like do the drinking water. Why is it my turn now? Like I've done this like 5 days." It's more about like actually you're just taking the initiative to just like actually like do this for each other, right? So this is why actually Ajahn Brahm is on record for saying that in his mind this is the ideal Buddhist monastery, where there's like no ego. Whatever needs to be done, someone will just step up automatically to do this. So that's actually by these are actions by body, speech, and mind for each other. I think actually this is a very useful sutta to cover on this now. We'll next go into speech, right? And a very large part of our interactions with each other is through speech. And again, the Buddha actually has got great advice on how to speak in a way that doesn't cause conflict in a sutta called the Analysis of Non-Conflict, the Arana Vibhanga Sutta, right? And this is actually an excerpt from it. It's a very long sutta. I strongly recommend it. But it's like, know what it means to flatter and to rebuke. Knowing these, avoid them and just teach Dharma. That's what I said. But why did I say this? And how is there like flattering and rebuking without teaching Dharma, right? So when you speak like this, right, some are rebuked. Pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, blah, 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 blah. All those who indulge in such happiness are beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing the wrong way. In speaking like this, some are flattered, and then actually pleasure linked to this and so on and so forth. So how do you not flatter nor rebuke but just teach the Dharma, right? You actually don't say that thing, oh, actually all those who do this are actually like stupid and blah, blah, blah. But you just talk about the principle. You just say this, the indulgence is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it's the wrong way. And the same thing again. Breaking off the indulgence is a principle of like free from of pain, harm, and stress and fever, and it's the right way. You don't talk about like who has done this. You just talk about actually the principle. Yeah. I think that the other maybe the related comment here is that the Chinese saying is like, 对事不对人, right? You just focus on actually the thing. You don't talk about you don't attack the person doing it. Yeah. I think in addition to this, right, I think it's useful to actually highlight that the term Dharma also actually means like causes and explanations. So when you are actually talking about like, okay, like indulgence is a principle beset by pain, blah, 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 it's useful to actually also explain why this is the wrong way. Don't just say it's the wrong way. Yeah. So that's how you actually teach Dharma. I just have a few more texts left. It looks very long, but it should be quite short. In addition to, okay, so this is actually like how do you avoid like conflict by your speech now, right? But in the event that actually conflict does break out, right, then what do you do, right? I think that's a very interesting teaching from this is by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. He is giving this analysis of this ritual in the Vinaya called covering over with grass. And this is a situation in the Sangha where both sides were actually arguing so much, right? That actually there is a point where there's a schism potentially, they'll split. And when this happens, right, actually what happens with this covering over grass, to summarize this entire slide, is that each side, right, will appoint a representative, and then you actually make a confession and you seek forgiveness from each other at the same time. Yeah, so you don't actually focus on like who's at fault or whatever it is, right? But both of them, right, actually would make a confession to say that my behavior was not worthy of a contemplative, right? And I think the other thing to note about the way that in the Vinaya, you would actually, there are two expectations. One is actually that monastics are expected to be open and transparent with each other and to invite correction, like in this case, right? So this is actually a rule, right? At the end of the retreat, the most senior monk will actually start by saying that I invite the Sangha to correct me based on what you've seen, what you've heard, what you suspect, and to correct me out of compassion, right? And if they have actually committed an offense, right, actually the sequence and what you actually do is that you directly confess it to any other monk, and then the other monk will actually then say, oh, do you recognize the offense? Then you say, I recognize it. Then you just say, okay, you should restrain yourself in the future. And that's it for the more minor offenses, right? The key thing to note here, right, is that actually there is no punishment. In fact, there's actually another sutta where another part of the Vinaya where the Buddha expressly said you should not be like punishing people, right, for these minor confessions. Do note that actually this is not the same as like the very serious offenses like the parajikas, right? So for example, if you have got sexual intercourse, you are immediately disrobed as a monk. No matter whether you wear robes or not, you're effectively considered to be not a monk. So that's actually the more severe cases. But for the majority of the cases, right, the confession rules are the majority of the 227 rules. You basically are invited to actually just be open, transparent, and to confess. And I think that the interesting thing to note here also is that how different this is from our day-to-day world, right? Like if you think about like politicians, confessing mistakes, how frequently have we seen this in the public? More frequently than not, right? They're actually told that, oh, actually, you have to not admit that you're wrong. You have to find a diplomatic way to like say that you acknowledge there's like something to learn or whatever it is, but you actually don't ever admit that you're wrong, right? I actually think that I'm not sure that I fully agree with this because from what I've seen also is that when you have that sincerity, when people know that actually you're truly sincere about it, frequently that actually, and if say for example that you take genuine actual steps to deal with the problem, frequently that actually yields a much better outcome. And one example I'll share from a real life case, right? It's actually this famous one of Johnson and Johnson actually recalled the entire. There was a case in Chicago where there were 7 people that died from taking Tylenol, which is the same as Panadol, right? This is in the early 80s. And what happened was that the then CEO of Tylenol, of J&J, James Burke, he actually went back to refer to this thing called the Credo in J&J, which is actually quite famous in the corporate world. And the Credo actually talks about how the company's responsibility is first to the customers, then to its employees, the community, and the stockholders in this following order. And he talks about actually the Credo is actually all about the consumer. So when the deaths happen, right, he immediately actually like used his credibility and also talk about the Credo, and actually like made the case right to actually spend the $100 million on a recall. And reading the detailed case studies on this, right, what was interesting was that actually the federal government told J&J to not do this, but instead they went ahead and did this, right? And because like actually from like the point of view like James Burke, he's saying that actually any relationship that works right is actually really about trust, and the same is true about business or any kind of like human institution for that matter. And what is interesting about this also is that after this recall happened, everyone was talking initially in the press in America about how this would completely destroy Tylenol. Nobody would ever buy Tylenol and so on and so forth. Very quickly, the stock price of J&J in just a few months after this whole incident, the way that it was the way that James Burke executed it, right, the recall, very quickly the stock price actually went back up and actually grew even further. And the Tylenol brand is still the leading brand of like a paracetamol in the US to this day, actually. Yeah, so I think that this is just one example, but I think that there are many other similar examples where if you have the integrity and the way and the ability to actually show that you actually truly mean it, that sincerity actually can bring you very far away. That's my 2 cents. So, yeah. So I think that my 2 cents is that as far as possible, right, one should push to be as transparent and open as helpful. So yeah, transparency and openness is helpful. So don't say that those who are not transparent have no credibility, right? Borrowing on like what we learned just now. Yeah. Before I go off, right, I actually want to also cover like my one of my favorite texts of all time, right? Um, and I think that this we've covered actually like a fair bit. With the first class we talked about like right view, and I spoke a fair bit about in all 3 classes about like how there's really a focus on our wisdom power. It's really not about like, using willpower. But I think that this particular text, which has its Chinese parallel, is very powerful in actually helping to convey that the path of Dharma is actually a natural progression of things, right? And you don't need to actually like make a wish or to actually like even will. And if you can see from the Chinese, right, actually it's actually even more like a empathic, right? And the Pali is the same thing, where it's not that you need not make a wish, or that it's actually that you cannot use your willpower to achieve this. You shouldn't be doing this, actually, right? And so actually this is the sutta, like monks, an ethical person who has fulfilled ethical conduct, need not make a wish, may I have no regrets. It's only natural that an ethical person has no regrets. When you have no regrets, you need not make a wish, may I feel joy. It's only natural that joy springs up. When you feel joy, you need not make a wish, may I experience rapture, piti. It's only, piti, P-I-T-I. It's only natural that rapture arises when you're joyful. When your mind is full of rapture, you need not make a wish, may my body become tranquil. It's only natural that your body becomes tranquil. When your body is tranquil, you need not make a wish, may I feel bliss. It's only natural that you feel bliss. When you feel bliss, you need not make a wish, may my mind be immersed in samadhi. So this is the jhanas. It's only natural that you actually will have your mind immersed in samadhi when you feel bliss. When your mind is immersed in samadhi, you need not make a wish, may I truly know and see. It's only natural that to truly know and see when your mind is immersed in samadhi. Then when you truly know and see, you need not make a wish, may I become dispassionate and disillusioned. Right? The nibbida, right, and the nirodha. It's only natural to become disillusioned and dispassionate when you truly know and see. And when you're disillusioned and dispassionate, you need not make a wish, may I realize the freedom and knowledge, the knowledge and vision of freedom. It's only natural to realize the knowledge and vision of freedom when you're disillusioned and dispassionate. And so amongst the knowledge and freedom, vision of freedom is the purpose and benefit of disillusionment and dispassion. Disillusionment and dispassion is the purpose and benefit of truly knowing and seeing. Truly knowing and seeing is the purpose and benefit of immersion, like samadhi, like jhanas. Immersion, like samadhi and jhana, is the purpose and benefit of bliss. Bliss is the purpose and benefit of tranquility. Tranquility is the purpose and benefit of rapture. Rapture is the purpose and benefit of joy. Joy is the purpose and benefit of not having regrets. Not having regrets is the purpose and benefit of skillful ethics. And so, monks, good qualities flow on and fill up from one to the other, going from the near shore to the far shore. And that is actually how we actually progress on this path. It is not through forcing, it's not through using willpower, it's not to actually just solely focus on like the fact that life is suffering, but avoiding the good, avoiding the bad, doing the good, purifying the mind. That's actually the way to experiencing the ultimate bliss. And with that, actually, I just want to thank everyone, and may all beings be well and happy, and may you progress on the path towards liberation. Yeah. So that's for today's class. Okay. Sorry, it took a bit longer because this was quite a bit, but maybe we will let me just answer some of the questions. So there's a question of like, how do we balance this versus giving excuse for that person? Sorry, do you want to explain that, Ethan? Sorry.
I think you were saying about replacing unwholesome thoughts by giving attention to a wholesome thought. So, for example, the unwholesome thoughts could be, why the person do this again? So the wholesome thought could something be, um, the person could be very tired from the weekend, and then etc. etc. So where do we strike the balance between giving the benefit of the doubt, applying wholesome thoughts versus giving excuse for the person?
Yeah, I think that the short answer would be that it depends on your state of mind. Right. If your state of mind, right, is actually filled with like a lot of anger, right, then you should actually make excuses for the person if that helps you to really see a different perspective. And then actually for the anger to that ill will, that resentment to actually like reduce. Yeah. And I think that the other point to highlight here is that you shouldn't be like making stuff up, right? It's like if that person has been like repeatedly like, backstabbing people, and then you go, oh, that person, maybe just has a very bad day or what, and making stuff like that up like that. But I think it would be better to instead like focus on like actually what do you genuinely like respect, or like actually you observe and you see actually this is true, and you know for yourself that this is true. and then you focus on those. Yeah, but the crux of the matter is really like what's your mental state at that point in time. Yeah, because all these, right, even like choosing what to see, how to see it, right, they are skillful ways for you to actually like balance out your mind. That's actually the main thing. Right. When you are getting angry or default or angry or like you have a strong sense of desire, that person is not suffering. That person is not incurring the karma. It's you. So actually, the main thing to focus on is, okay, how's my state of mind? Right. What do I feel towards this person? Like, what do I need to then do to actually like mitigate this? Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how do you stop yourself from going to that state of mind at your daily work?
Yeah, I think that there is a degree of like mindfulness that needs to be there. You need to be aware of like what's your state of mind. Um, the other tip I would strongly recommend is to remove yourself from that context. Is say, for example, that you're at work, right? And then actually the certain set of conditions around work. Say, for example, the sitting arrangement of you and your colleagues are such that your most annoying colleague, right, is always in that same place, same time of day, and so on and so forth that
Everyone
irritates
laughing
you.
already, brother PJ. You see,
Huh? Why?
everyone is laughing.
Why? That's true. Right? I mean, it happens right once in a while. At least for me, yeah. And when that happens, right, then what you should do is to, as far as possible, to try to avoid that situation. Right. If you can't avoid that situation, then actually do the other things that are recommended, that Sariputta recommended and the Buddha recommended. Look away, try to forget about it. Right. And then actually, I think what is actually very useful is that when you are doing your own daily practice, right, to actively do a loving kindness practice. Yeah, to mitigate against that emotion of like resentment. And then, right, you actually cultivate enough of that loving kindness, right? And you actually think about that person and you go, okay, may that person be well and happy. Not in that same context. So it's not the same as like saying that when you are interacting with a person who is causing you a lot of like pain and suffering, right? At that point in time, then you're like applying metta. Usually that is a bit too late frequently. Yeah, so I think that applying metta in a context where actually you are actually better able to do so, right? You're not being triggered and so on and so forth, right? And then over time, you will actually be able to apply that metta right at that point in time. Yeah. So to build up that metta muscle like very gradually over time. Don't expect like miracles like straight away. Yeah. That's my 2 cents on this. Yeah. Yeah. If I may share a very powerful story that Ajahn Brahm has shared before. Sorry, it's just going to take a little bit more time, but I think this is quite important to highlight. When he was teaching in the prisons, right, one of the prisoners actually made a comment to him to say that, Ajahn, whatever you teach about this loving kindness, it's all well and fine, but it doesn't apply in the world that we live in, the prisons. And Ajahn Brahm was like, okay, I love a challenge. So tell me like who's the worst person, right? And then actually everyone agreed, all the prisoners agreed that this particular warden was really a complete asshole, right? And what Ajahn Brahm then said was like, okay, and Ajahn Brahm was like, okay, why do you say that he's an asshole, right? Like, why do you say that he's the worst? And he did many things. Like one of the things that he did was that he deliberately sent a prisoner who was very poor and whose wife visited him only like a few times a year. He deliberately sent the prisoner to a part of the prison where the PA system couldn't reach when the wife came into to visit. So he deliberately deprived the prisoner and the wife of a visit, right? Um, and so the other thing also is that this warden actually deliberately doesn't recognize any prisoner. He will just treat them like they don't exist. Yeah. And so Ajahn Brahm was like, okay, that's interesting. Which of you has got daily contact with him? And then there was this old gentleman who was like, oh, I make his tea every morning. So then Ajahn Brahm was like, okay, I'm going to coach you. And then he coached him like, okay, you know, when you're preparing the tea, you know, like actually like just give as much love and kindness as you can, like do the best job you can, right? Make the best tea that you can for him. And then repeatedly over the weeks, like Ajahn Brahm was saying that, yeah, he'll come and say, oh, how is it? And it's like, oh, nothing, nothing. You know, it's like he still doesn't treat me like I exist. When one fine day, he was like, Ajahn, it's like something happened. I served him tea, and the warden just went, mm. And then apparently that made ripples throughout the entire system because people were like, wow, he actually acknowledged the existence of a prisoner in his presence, right? And then Ajahn was like, okay, that's very good. Carry on, like, you know, like applying that loving kindness, like doing as best as you can. And a few weeks later, the same prisoner came and told Ajahn Brahm that I gave him the tea, and he turned to me and he said, "Thank you very much," and looked him eye in the eye. And then apparently that made waves throughout the entire like Western Australian like prison system because this guy is known as a hard ass actually. Yeah. So I think that the thing to take away from this is that even in a prison system, this can work, let alone actually in a workplace where your bosses are probably, you know, they might be superficially like even more respectful, right? So I think that that's actually quite important to note now. Yeah. I hope that helps. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate. Yeah.